doing a lot of car-to-car shooting today. We're out in these crazy wide open spaces, and we're using a drone, we're using a Razor, other cars, etc. to chase our picture cars. So we need a lot of range so that our director and producers can see what's happening on our monitor. So we're using the Bolt 3000, and it gets 3,000 feet of range, which is exactly what we need out here. So we've got the receiver here on our 17-inch monitor for the director, and you'll see that we have the transmitter way up here. So we got it up as high as possible so that we have a really good line of sight, which helps the performance of the system. We're gonna have somebody up here in the front seat controlling pan and tilt on the shot over arm, and then we're sending a signal out from here to the Teradek transmitter, which will then give us 3,000 feet of range back to the director's monitor.
Do you have a number? You don't?
No, after this. Welcome everybody to the 2017 edition of the NAB live show stream from the Teradek booth. Today we're going to be talking about VR production, and I've got a pretty stacked table to my left. I'm Mike Nichols, AbelCine Business Development Manager. To my left, we've got Ben Schwartz. He's a director in the VR world. To his left, Louis Smithingham, who is the president of 30 Ninjas, a very well-known VR production company. To his left, Casey Sapp, president of Virtual. And you guys, we're going to talk a little bit about VR production and how it kind of differs from traditional 2D production and what sort of nuances go into the conception of creative for VR as opposed to 2D production. And, you know, just talk a little bit about your experiences and what type of rigs you've worked with and what's exciting and what's on the horizon. And you know, maybe let's start off with what's this show specifically? You know, because last year there was a lot of hype leading up to NAB 2016. We're going to see VR cameras, and it was kind of a little bit of a letdown. But you know, this year you can't walk more than 5 feet without seeing a new VR camera. So, anything that you've seen thus far from the show that's kind of been exciting?
I'll start. I mean, I think we were talking earlier. We're all pretty excited about the Yi Halo, which is their Google Jump solution. Actually, Louis had a chance to shoot with it. It looks pretty great so far.
I mean, we shot the sizzle reel for it that's out right now, and in the pre-pro meeting, we were going over the budget, and I was like, how much should we budget for a roto? Like, let's all be honest. We're all friends here. Everything gets roto, and they're like, oh, no, you don't need to do that. And I was like, yeah, but we really do. How much should I put? And I put an extra line on him, and even though they told us not to. And then we got the footage back, and it was really confusing because, you know, all these cameras are amazing. Ozo, John, they all use an algorithm called stereographic optical flow. And it produces great images and great stitching, but it does produce errors. And the stereo sometimes needs to be reconfigured. And the footage we got back was perfect, like in shots where I deliberately expected it to fall apart, and we were able to aggressively push the envelope further and further and further. And so I'm really excited about the stereo and the stitch on that. I think we're all pretty big fans of stereo here and advocates for stereo. What did you say before we got doing stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of niche cameras here. No camera can do everything, and so while there's light, there's big, there's fast, there's something going up in space, there's someone that go underwater, there's some with great color depth, there's some that live stream. We had a lot fewer choices last year, whereas now we can actually go through a whole production and choose the right camera for the shot instead of kind of putting a round peg in a square hole. We're really excited about 3D because that's where the professional production companies are going to play. And 2D is going to get solved, and it's already solved. And so for experimentation, for Facebook, for social media, for the big cinematic stories and what brands and agencies want, it's not going to be a camera that you put in your pocket all the time. So I really like to see Halo and what else is out there, and we've brought a camera as well, which is a small part of a lot of different productions, and so it's a great time to be here, and it just keeps getting bigger.
Great. Yeah, there's two schools of thoughts with stereoscopic VR, and I'm of the belief that when it's great, and it takes the immersive aspect of what we do to like the next level. So I think with the gear that's out there and the gear that's on the horizon, when you're approached by a client for a shoot that might not be necessarily educated in how to craft a creative for 360, how do you deal with that? Like what sort of approach do you take with a client who might not necessarily know how to conceive a creative in 360?
Well, I would say I probably would start by asking them, what the shoot is about, what they envision creatively, what they envision the utilization of 360 is going to be. Do they think it's going to be static? Is it going to be moving? What's the physical environment that we're shooting in? And once you have a better feel for the content of the shoot, you're able to then sort of go through the options. Okay, here are your possibilities. These are the options that you can rent. And you kind of tick off the pros and the cons of each, workflow, budget, size, and usually once you do that, you're able to kind of hash out on a case-by-case basis, what the best option is for your client.
Yeah, I think we do something very similar. It ends up being a lot of hand-holding, and I feel like education is a huge part of my job. I have a playlist that I send out, say like, here, watch these, and our company has a very different idea about how to do VR and how to do 360. A lot of it, so this is controversial. My personal belief is 360 video isn't VR. It's not. It gets closer when you have stereo and ambisonic sound, and that's not to diss 360 video, but when you accept that you don't have to constantly obsess over giving this illusion that you're a paraplegic with a head, like an owl head, which is what a lot of 360 video does, you can then open yourself up to a lot more tools. And so most clients come to you with so I want to have a scene in a jacuzzi, and I want to be in the middle of the jacuzzi and spinning around constantly. Or I'm in the middle of a table, and it's like, that's going to be weird. What if we moved over here, and then we're able to cut here? And I think it's just a lot of education and then play and figuring things out. We advocate pretty strongly for doing mini tests to get people up to speed. We use storyboards really heavily, and we use datas a lot to do that. Casey?
Yeah, I mean, agencies, they know what they want. And so agencies are a different ball game. But when you're going direct to client, I kind of run more strategy and initiatives for virtual. I try to stay out of the technical because it's changing so fast. And I just want them to believe this is important to us. This is what they need, whether it's good or bad. They know that they need to take a step. Now, the question is, what kind of a step? And then if it's small, we do experimental films. And those have all gone extremely well for us when they're ready for something like that. And sometimes they just want to go out of the gate and they want to go big. And so it really is, as long as they buy in that this is something that they may not get right the first time, but it's going to go from 360 to volumetric and volumetric to something else. And so this is the first step. And they need to take a step, wherever that step is, will help them get there. And so far, we've had a lot of really good results just going direct to client in that way.
So let's backtrack for a second. 360 video, VR. There's some schools of thought where you could use VR as a catch-all to describe, 360, AR, even VR, even MR now, which is something that's becoming more and more defined. I personally am of the camp that I think stereoscopic 360 video, I feel comfortable saying it's VR, but I think 360 mono, I try to make the distinction, this is 360 video.
Well, I'll add something in. The guy from Oculus who did Wolfenstein.
Oh, Carmack.
John Carmack said at OC3 last year, if it's compelling in a headset, then it's VR. If it's not compelling in a headset, it's not VR.
I would agree. I think it's a very common debate in VR circles. What qualifies VR. Some people will say that it's not true VR unless you have like the fabled 6 degrees of freedom to move around within an experience. Even stereo 3D doesn't really meet that expectation. Me personally, I think the easiest way of thinking about it is, is it designed for a headset? Is it designed for Oculus or HTC or Gear? And if it is, then it's VR. Now there are various degrees of VR. Obviously, qualitatively there are not very compelling experiences and more compelling ones.
Yes.
But I think that so long as you are thinking of the headset as a final deliverable, whatever it is, even if it's Mono 360, I think it can be called VR, if not, very interesting, compelling VR.
I love this topic, honestly, because, if you look at the Eskimos, I love to give this example. They have 100 words for snow, right? And we only have one. They've been living in snow their whole life. So they care about, what snow is dirty and what snow they can drink and what snow they can sleep in, right? So when we start living, in the Western world and in VR, we're going to care about what the differences are. We're going to care about the plates. We're going to care about, what's LiDAR, what's not. And we were going really in depth a couple minutes ago, farther than even I could go. But at the end of the day, because of where we are in the market, it's fine to say the 360 is VR. And I agree with Lewis's definition, but it's going to define. And I think we're going to go out in the consumer world in a couple years, and they're going to be like 360, they're going to know what that is, but no one really knows right now, and it doesn't matter.
And you hear terms bandied about as buzzwords, but the problem is, I think, when you start adding what are actually technical terms as buzzwords, then it starts getting, well, you can disagree. Because I think what is VR is a philosophical question. Michael Heim has a great book, Metaphysics of VR, that goes into what is VR. But when you start saying it's volumetric or it's light field, then there's you have to look at those are actual technical terms.
Also, I would say that there's an interesting phenomenon in VR production, which is a lot of people like to have this argument, what is VR, and they spend a lot of time talking about, the various technical aspects of the medium, and much less discussion about storytelling, what makes compelling stories in 360? How is it different from traditional 2D film grammar? To me, that's actually really the much more interesting conversation, but it's not one that you hear as often as, what is VR? Is 360 video VR? It's just, I don't know. It's kind of a funny paradox.
I subscribe to this concept of universal stories. I think there are very few stories that are only interesting in one medium, unless they rely heavily upon time. Thinking of cinema as a sequential art form that is time-based. Unlike cave paintings aren't time-based. Comic books aren't time-based. So there are certain stories that can exist there, and I suppose there are certain stories in VR and 360 that can be told because they use peripheral or tracking of some sort. But I think it's, the same story that's going to be good in a comic book is likely going to be good in a movie or in VR. That sounds simplistic.
Actually, can I ask you guys a question? This is something, a word that gets thrown around a lot in people talking about VR is empathy.
Cool.
Exactly, which is a word that I think is every time you hear the word empathy in a VR panel discussion, you got to take a shot, So it's
I walk out.
It's identification.
Right.
It's connection, and there's the presence technology offers that. And there's been a lot of panels that have talked about these topics, and it's when you've been in it, it's just kind of like you said, it's a drinking game.
Yeah. I got a better word that starts with E that maybe we should start talking about a lot more is entertainment. I'm not going to feel empathy until I'm entertained. And a lot of these pieces have these grandiose concepts of really good social change, but they're boring. And I'm sorry, if you look at Errol Morris, who got a guy out of prison because his film's amazing, or you look at the West Memphis 3, who are only out today because of that documentary. They were innocent the whole time, but they're out because of the documentary being amazing, compelling, interesting, entertaining storytelling. I think instead of worrying about making people feel a thing, we should make them stay for 30 seconds or more first. That sounds mean.
But clearly we're all passionate about it.
Yeah.
And we know there's something there. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't meaningful and impactful to us. So it's maybe not about empathy for everyone, but there is an emotion and there is a connection that we all
Agreed.
have.
Well, the interesting thing that I've found as VR and 360 production has...
We can just say VR.
Okay. as VR has kind of taken shape and become more of a real thing as opposed to, oh, let's kick the tires on it and see if it's something... It's the first medium that really needs to have someone that's not just divided technical and creative. You have to have skill sets in both arenas. Otherwise, you couldn't do the things that you'd want to do. You want to entertain somebody, but you know that in order to entertain them, you need to add certain technical elements to the production that someone who is, an off-the-shelf VR producer might not have access to. So
it's very interesting, and for that reason, when Virtual was created about 2 years ago, we focused on the technical, and so we've actually done and are doing work with Lewis and 30 Ninjas because they are extremely good at creative, and that's just something that we haven't had the time or the bandwidth to focus on to do the others really well. And so when we try to do native 3D, when we try to focus on maybe underwater, which is what some people know us for, we try to do that at the best we possibly can, but it's hard. It's hard to do creative well. It's hard to do technical at the same time. And if you're not really good at one or the other, you're going to miss, So it's a really good point, and it's very different.
My primary job function is as a translator. So I have a very technical... Doug has written physics papers. He's an incredible engineer, but he's a creative. My partner, Doug Lyman, did Born Identity Edge Tomorrow, and we also work with Simon Crane, who's an amazing stunt coordinator, and then Julina, who's also an amazing creative. And my function is to run between people like Virtual or Source Sound or The Molecule and translate creative thoughts into actionable technical thought and then relay between the two and figure out ways that we can create something that's technically feasible and doable, but also creative and interesting. And I think you hit on something really interesting where I came from Post. I was a bullet time guy, and it's this place where finally Post has the respect on set for a second.
Right.
Which is exciting, and I feel like VR is more collaborative than any other film set I've ever been on, where everybody's working and everybody's sharing and learning from each other. And that, at least the fun sets are like that. And I like that. I mean, Invisible was like that.
It was, yeah. I mean, I would also say that VR, when you're shooting VR, the process lends itself to just being careful, really taking your time, thinking about what you're doing before you do it. We've all worked on, really just kind of crazy run and gun off the cuff VR shoots, and they can be done, but that's how you introduce mistakes and, that less than optimal viewing experiences. So it is definitely a medium that lends itself to people that really care about the technical side and really want to talk about it and think it over and make sure that it's perfect. Because if it's not perfect, your viewer is going to know it. Even if they can't quite say why, they'll say, hey, there's something off about that experience.
So true.
Not to mention the fact, and this is kind of an abstract addition to the conversation, but you kind of want to like the people you're working with. As and as silly as that sounds, I mean, there are moments when you will be in close quarters for an extended period of time.
Rock together.
Lewis and I went on a shoot, and we were spending minutes lying down in the field next to each other. That's
holding hands the whole time.
It sounded romantic, but we were actually just out of view of the camera.
The sunrise too.
It's actually one of my favorite things about working with people for the first time on 360 shoots. It's telling, just so you know, the main part of shooting 360 is hiding behind trees.
Yeah.
I mean, very narrow trees.
Exactly.
Underwater, Casey does a lot of underwater. And underwater 360 is even worse because you're hiding behind rocks from sharks, which just is not fun.
Or you're just painting them out later.
Yeah.
So.
The bubble trails.
Yeah.
But it is. I think that's my favorite part is with 360 is everybody I work with is my friend, and we hang out. I don't have to work with them. We have tiny crews, even on big budget shoots, and so we're all friends, and everybody touches gear, and everybody hangs out. And the lack of Video Village means that like class divide starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's true. And thus far it's a fairly tight community of people in 360 VR production. And so we all know one another. There's Jason. One right there. There's Jason Diamond. It's a small community of people, and there's a lot of mutual respect and people that are helping one another, whether it's on Facebook or, however. So I've found the community of VR production to be really quite nice.
I mean, every crappy VR piece is another dead client. Every time a client has a bad experience, every time a client releases something they don't like in 360 is another client lost, potentially forever. I always say a rising tide lifts all boats that don't have holes in them. And it's so true for 360 because you get a lot of people who are hobbyists that decide that, we were all from fairly intense technical backgrounds, and I still feel like my job is really hard all the time, and I feel barely qualified, although I've spent years doing point clouds and bullet time. And you get these people who come in thinking it's easy, and it's not, and then clients walk away with having spent an absurd amount of money with something they don't like, and every time that happens is a time that we all lose money. And so the more we can do to get together, if my friend, who's even my competitor, is making a piece and he needs help learning how to do this, you're short a guy, here, let me get you somebody, let me refer you, and then you're able to create a community that learns more. Because the more nobody has 1,000 hours yet. Nobody has. There's a couple people have over 500. Probably 6 of us on camera.
I don't know.
I mean, it's low.
Yeah.
And the more that the community fosters education and intelligence among everybody, is the more we all live together and we make more money together longer.
Well, it's funny. You said the sort of the amount of bad VR is
Painful.
detrimental. And I think the reason is because, traditional 2D acquisition format shooting has had over almost 100 years of
100
being refined. And it's there. It's not 360 VR is not going to overtake that. But we're at a point now where, and I think you guys would agree, people are spending money now on it. And it's critical that the stuff that's created now is good, because I feel like if there's a dip in quality because the pool of talent has gotten watered down, I think that money that's being spent now might get a little, the spenders might get a little gun shy.
Yeah.
So, okay, on that note, what makes bad VR?
There's 2 ways. So are you talking story or are you talking technical?
Let's approach it from both. Give me a story element that would, in your opinion, make it for bad VR.
It's a very broad question. I mean, I think there are a lot of people that we're in this stage right now with VR production where, as you say, production companies are spending money. They're throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. So not everyone always knows, including us, right off the bat, what's going to be a compelling VR experience, what isn't. I don't know if there's necessarily one answer to your question, but I will say that from my perspective, I think what makes compelling VR experiences for me is the same thing that makes compelling 3D movies or any kind of stereoscopic immersive experience, which is a strong sense of place, a strong sense of immersion in a place. If you are telling a story in 360, you are, by the definition, emphasizing the surroundings, the environment of the story in which it's being told. And so if the environment, if the space in which you are in is important to the experience, is important to the story, then I think 360 and VR have the potential to enhance that.
I mean, I think it's all about expectation. And if someone's going to release it to one of the main stores and they're going to put advertising and marketing dollars behind it and they're going to say it's groundbreaking, you should expect that, right? And if it's just going to throw up on YouTube or somewhere else and saying this is a test, and there's footnotes, then you're a lot more forgiving. But when the big companies are pushing some of the really high budget stuff out, and that's I think where it hurts the most, honestly. And so it has to do with properly describing it and putting it in the right place, and the curators really managing that properly. And I think sometimes things get pushed out to the wrong crowd at the wrong time. But there's nothing wrong with creating content. It's just, if you're going to show someone their first VR experience, you really want that to be good. And sometimes it doesn't always happen.
I mean, I'll swing negative. You guys swing positive. I'll be the crank. So there are canaries in the coal mine. Number one, anytime a head-mounted rig is brought up, warning bells go off really, really loud, because I've yet to see that done in a way that is not nauseating or awful or money hemorrhaging, because the way you stitch those things, it's just going to cost some money, dude. Anytime a camera's put in the middle of a table, anytime the camera's put in the middle of a jacuzzi or in the middle of like anything, honestly, because I don't have a swivel head and I don't have 8 eyes, so I'm not going to be able to look back there and look here and then look here and look there. And then anytime we talk about unstabilized motion, I get worried.
Yeah.
You know, I'll say that there is a certain hackneyed approach to 360, which is probably it probably comes from people that really haven't thought about it very much. You know, what makes compelling VR versus what doesn't. It's the same with 3D. You know, you saw a lot of really terrible and gimmicky 3D where the storytelling was really focused on, you know, things that came out of the screen. You know, throwing, you know, severed heads at the screen and stuff like that, you know, versus really creating the opposite, you know, space that recedes away from you and creates a sense of depth and immersion. That's a much more kind of subtle and compelling use of the technology. So with VR and with 360, you see people that they have these conceptions of what the tech is or what it could be, and it's really not based on experience or reflection. They think, okay, I'm going to put the camera on someone's head, you know, which is, I think we can all agree, probably the worst use of the technology.
I mean,
that there
prove
is.
me wrong. Please prove me wrong. If somebody can do that and do it in a way that isn't nauseating and doesn't hemorrhage money, doesn't do the dreaded $10,000 a minute.
Right, and but also like Lewis is saying, you know, putting it in a table, people that try to compose for full 360 degrees, that's not always such a good idea because, you know, your head can't swivel around.
We're not owls.
And if you're not sitting in a swivel chair, you're going to miss, you know, 50% of the story. So a lot of the times, it's really much more useful to just compose, you know, as far as your head can turn, whatever that is, 130 degrees, and let the rest of it just be space.
Yep. Just give them presents. They did it well.
Yep.
I don't think we need to talk about what technically makes bad VR because I think we all know, you know, it's...
Yeah, we don't need to talk about rotoscoping.
Do we think that the world is ready for a VR narrative feature?
There's already one.
Conceived for... I
The
mean,
Passion
well...
of the Christ one? I haven't seen it
Invisible
yet.
was technically, wasn't a feature, but it was...
Well, it might have technically been
Yeah,
a
there was a
feature.
director's
It
cut,
really
right?
is
I mean,
about
There was a director.
it really is about adoption. And, you know, I've heard that a very well-known director who spent a lot of money on a virtual reality film is just going to wait 9 more months because it just means that many more headsets.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I think the more that people have access to headsets, the more likely chance there's going to be. Even if someone made the best possible piece of content, it's chicken or egg, I think it's not going to drive people to buy a headset. I think it's got to be easy. It's got to be fast, cheap, and easy. Pick 2, right? It's got to be cheap and easy. And if we get that, there will be a lot of really good narrative pieces in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's coming. There are headsets now available that I would watch and do spend time in, willingly, not like outside of work. Like I spend hours in PlayStation, and the Pixel is super comfortable too.
Yeah, and I'll say too that, I mean, you know, we all have spent a lot of time in VR headsets, and
Too
so
many.
we, I think, are able, the thought of spending, you know, a feature length amount of time, 90 minutes or however, in a headset would be daunting would be physically impossible for someone that hadn't worn a headset before. For us, we could do it, but I think for someone that's new to VR, I think you're looking at much
gaming,
much
too.
shorter spans of time. You know, maybe
I
10
will say
minutes.
this though, we have a Star VR headset at our booth,
pretty cool.
which has double the field of view, and I feel a lot more comfortable watching experiences for a lot longer time because it's a lot more natural and comfortable. So even little things like that, to having the same stories that are out there, like Invisible, just with a more natural field of view would make all the difference to people in the world.
And the what is it? The refresh rate as well. I watched Invisible in a PlayStation the other day, and I've watched it in a Pixel now, in a Daydream, and it's a very different experience. And it's also about engaging content. But there's not much right now in terms of narrative budgets. I think ours is the biggest in terms of non-commercial and longest, and there's not. You need money to blow things up. So my partner, we make action movies. So you want to blow something up, it costs money. 50 grand an explosion minimum. And to create HBO style content, you need production value. And it's going to be like, we're in this weird where it's like, people spend time, but there's not enough stuff to spend time with. Sort of gap. Even the games. You played the Star Wars game, by the way?
I have not.
So sick. You?
Well, no. Well, I don't have time for anything aside of work. So taking Invisible, which is a series that why don't you tell everybody what you did on Invisible, what your role was with Invisible?
What didn't I do at this point?
Well, not what you did, because you probably did everything, but what
my
your
technical role?
Yeah.
VR producer, director of photography, editor, VR supervisor.
Okay, so you didn't do that much.
Nah, nothing. I was barely on set ever.
Maybe the
Post supervisor.
the temporary answer, because we all agree that wearing even the most comfortable headset with the expanded field of view is still it's a 30-minute or less.
It messes up my hair.
Yeah.
No, I'm not even kidding. Like
I don't have to worry about that.
10 minutes ago, we're at his booth, and I really want to check out the Star VR, and I'm like, sorry, dude, I'm gonna be on camera in a minute. I can't do it.
So I neglected to introduce the fourth member of our panel, Lewis's hair, which is taking on a life of its own within the community.
It's perfect.
But jumping back to Invisible, you kind of have to think that
Ben was on Invisible too, I should say.
Yes, Ben. Now, but what would you do on Invisible?
So on Invisible, I was in charge of all the GoPro rigs. It was Lewis. What was the percentage of John versus GoPro?
It depends upon the shooting. So the first round of shooting, the GoPro ratio was really high. I would say it was closer to 40%, maybe 45. The second round, it narrowed down. Of the Ultimate Picture, episode 1 is pretty heavy duty on GoPros.
We tended to use a 3-cam GoPro rig with Intania lenses whenever we wanted to get closer in to the action than the John allowed us.
Yeah.
So usually in Invisible, whenever you see any kind of a close-up, that's a GoPro shot.
With one exception, maybe, yeah.
Well, that just illustrates how, coming from a technical background and transitioning into someone more creative as you're directing more pieces, you have to have that I believe that to be a successful VR director, you have to have a technical background.
Yeah.
You just have to, because it will allow you to, or you bring someone on, to be your technical voice. But in this early on stage, it doesn't always work where you'll have the resources or the access to bring on someone like a Lewis.
Or Ben or Casey.
Yeah.
You do run into issues where you have directors who just are not technical at all. And they tend to have trouble with it because it's a technical medium. I'm not saying you have to understand stereographic optical flow, but you do have to be somewhat. All the directors that we work with are pretty technical.
I think at a minimum the directors have to be technically inclined. There are a number
Aware of it.
Aware, yeah. I mean, there are a number of directors out there, and in a previous life I worked as a DIT. Mostly on commercials, and there's a whole range of directors in terms of technical facility. Some are super technical, and some don't care at all. In fact, they're really hostile when you try to get them to think technically.
Don't tell me about that nerd stuff.
So in VR, that attitude really doesn't work. You have to always have at least one eye on the technical side of things, or you're just going to fail. And I think that when I'm working on VR sets with directors who come from more traditional, film and 2D backgrounds, a lot of them really, really bristle because they realize that everything they know and everything they've learned over however many years really doesn't apply anymore. It's a new grammar, it's a new language, new ways of working on set, brand new ways of lighting for DPs. Everything has to be unlearned, and that's hard for people who've been at it for a long time.
Yeah, DPs have a real hard time with that.
And what about when an agency were to reach out to you, when they have their very specific parameters for their clients? This blue needs to be this specific blue, and obviously the tech doesn't allow for the color control as traditional. At least not yet, but it's getting there. how do you navigate that when brands reach out to you?
It's about trade-offs and what trade-offs they're willing to make, and if they're not willing to make any trade-offs, are they willing to have the budget to do whatever that's necessary for that shot? And a lot of agencies, being a production company, they'll take a huge fee, and you get squeezed quite a bit to do good work. And so I haven't really seen a lot of quality agency examples. There's some. I mean, Art of Patron was one that we did early on, but people just need to understand the budget to make a shot happen.
I didn't know you did Art of Patron.
So the guys that we have at Virtual did Art of
That's
Patron.
great.
Yeah.
That piece is awesome.
Yeah. So, and by the way, we did
That's early
Lewis's logo
Yeah, we did.
for 30 Ninjas as well.
Oh, very nice.
So we had for Invisible.
Yeah.
So we had a part in
The
that as
vanity
well.
card.
So, yeah, I mean, agencies, they know where the money is, but trying to make a good story and work within those parameters, if they don't really have a lot of experience there, they're very hard to work with. And so you're seeing a lot more agencies have that VR person.
Yep.
And it's getting easier to talk with them because they're more aware and sensitive.
Early on, we had a brand tell us, we want to shoot VR, but we want to make sure everybody's looking in the same spot at all times. So can we not have them turn their heads? And I was like, no. We'll just black it out everywhere else. What?
Yeah. Agencies make promises that you're expected to fulfill.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty sensitive to those, but there's some good ones out there that are worth working with.
I think it's important that individuals like yourselves and your contemporaries just keep driving the point home that they need to have someone in-house. Agencies
totally do.
need to have someone in-house that has an understanding on how to, I guess like you would say you do, translate.
Yeah, just translate it.
Because early on with VR production, there was an instance where there was a very specific brand had come through with a very specific request, and there were few people that could help them navigate it. And I had a discussion with them saying, don't do this. It's not really, this is not how you want to. And they ignored it, and the problem is that the blowback comes back onto you guys, because no matter what, you can stream into the wind, but if they don't listen, you're still at their mercy.
But you don't have to shoot it then.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's
I think we're at a point now where I
hate to sound like a jerk, but I've started getting to the point where, like, with branded stuff, it's like, look, we're not going to do it that way. You can talk about it like that. It's not going to happen. I just did a piece, but then there are, that does happen where brands are like, we're doing it that way, and you're like, no, I'm not shooting it then. But I just did a piece. I directed a piece for Vodafone with McCann Erickson,
which looked great.
We did bracketing, HDR bracketing, which I was very proud of, and it was in Romanian too. So I was directing in a foreign language that sounds like a mix of German and Russian and Spanish or Italian.
Doesn't it seem like you're directing in a foreign language anyway?
It
with
does,
VR?
but it was the point I'm getting is they had a brand person who knew it. This guy called Platon, and he knew VR enough to be like, I know what a nozo is. I know what this is, and basically, whenever there was a discussion, he would go, and he would just talk to me.
That's great.
And you're seeing that more and more, but the last 2 years, it's been very hard.
It's been awful.
Very hard to find that. So.
And I would say that for me as a freelancer, I don't necessarily have that same luxury of that you guys are talking about. But I will say that if somebody comes to me with an idea that I think is bad, or is technically unfeasible, or if there are better ways of achieving it, then I will really try to talk them out of their bad idea nicely, and really try and convince them that, actually, I think you might be coming at this from the wrong angle. I think there are better, more intelligent ways of doing it, and more often than not, I find that they're receptive to it.
Can I ask you a question, Ben? So I was a freelancer, I was a freelancer, now I have a company, and one of the things I ran into as a freelancer, you run into this problem where, like, because you as a freelancer have no control over a post, you may shoot something in the most beautiful, amazing, shoot all these beautiful plates and everything is great, and then it gets handed over to some 14-year-old at the company and garbled. How do you handle and work with post-production to make sure your work that you shoot well, because I know you shoot good work, ends up like I saw your whiskey piece and it looks good.
Yeah, I mean, it was the same as a DIT. I mean, when you leave the set, that work is out of your hands. So all you can really do is your best, and know that the footage that you're handing people is technically as good as you had hoped it would be. Once it gets to post, if you're not involved in post, as I tend not to be, you sort of have to absolve yourself and kind of wash your hands and be like, I wish I could have more involvement with this than I do. There have been a number of pieces that I've worked on that have really disappointed me because I had high expectations for them. They didn't quite turn out. Conversely, pieces that I had low expectations for really blew me away because they were posted so well. And so I think that, on every piece I work on, I always try to keep in touch with production via email. Hey, how's it going? Just want to, have any questions? How's the footage look? They usually appreciate that kind of input communication, and sometimes I think I'm able to offer opinions and feedback, particularly if they share footage with me in post, and help evolve the post process that way. But certainly as a freelancer, you just kind of have to cut ties.
Terror.
Yeah.
So last thought here now. This is a good one. What do we want out of the tech and the creative? What do we want out of the next step of VR production? What's missing right now?
Compression algorithms.
No, you're right.
I mean, it's kind of funny, but if we had better resolution on mobile, a lot more people would be seeing really quality stuff.
You have this weird quality drop, or like, I can't think of the word now, but people are used to watching 4K TVs and gaming in 4K. I mean, they put on this headset that you just paid $500 for, and it looks like garbage.
Yeah.
Relative garbage.
Well, I mean, compared, like it looks like 480.
Right.
Yeah.
I really am hoping for a united front among really all developers of the technology, cameras and headsets, because I would really hate to see this technology torpedoed by a format war, much as, well, there are a lot of things that killed 3D in the home, but one of which was nobody could agree on standards. Are we going active? Are we going passive? And I would really like to see people that are involved in the distribution of this tech really all on the same page, not really trying to one-up one another, and really all working together to really get this technology into the hands of consumers, because right now, let's be honest, it's not. It's still a fairly limited niche market. I think the potential for it is enormous, but I think there's any number of things that can trip it up along the way.
I mean, the Zcam and Google have a great pipeline, right? And everyone wants to use those cameras that aren't extremely technical because they can kind of handhold through that whole process. A lot of people want more pipelines like that for cameras, except, like we said, not every shot allows you to shoot with those cameras. You got to sometimes shoot with bigger ones, or one's in space, one's underwater. But I think the future is that you can match the creativity and the creative and the technical when you can send that up to the cloud, and you don't have to worry about messing that up in VFX or some guy who doesn't know how to stitch, and so those cameras offer, I think, the future of the next couple of years of pipelines for cameras, because it just saves you a lot of money and gets you to where you need to go faster.
To that end as well, having grown-up internet speeds in the United States would be awesome. I spent 3 weeks in Romania, where my hotel room, which was it was a nice hotel, but it wasn't the greatest. The Wi-Fi had 200 up. So, I mean, the rest of the world's there, and we wouldn't have to worry so much about compression if we just got onto reasonable internet standards in the United States. It gets absurd how slow it is. I meant headsets also, but that's just a general.
Yeah.
And also, we were talking at the beginning about the Yi Halo and the Google Jump platform of cloud stitching. I think cloud stitching in general is a pretty excellent service.
It's the best.
And stitching, anyone who's ever done it manually, whether it's in AVP or in Nuke, knows it's really, really hard work. It's very painstaking work. I don't know whether or not it's ever going to go away or not as a manual task, but I think that cloud stitching is really beneficial for all of us as content creators.
It's uniquely frustrating stitching as well, because I've come from posts where I've done a lot of roto work And rotoing, you can always get it right. But stitching, you can't always get it right. And that really is a bummer. But I mean, I think
It'll get less.
It'll get less.
You know, 2 or 3 years from now, maybe 15% of shots instead of 50%. But it'll always be there.
You'll get to this thing where, like, I think, you know, in Soho, our office in Soho, you throw a stick and you hit a roto artist. But I can't throw a stick and hit a stitcher. And so I lean towards optical flow and cloud stitching because, quite frankly, I can outsource stitching easier.
Yes.
Or rotoing easier. It's much easier to outsource that than outsource a stitch.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, look, there's a ton of new tech here.
You should see his camera, by the way.
Yeah, Casey's camera. You want to just really talk about it really quick?
For those of you guys out there, we built an underwater 3D camera. It also does broadcasting. We've got some stuff on the horizon for broadcasting, and there aren't any other underwater 3D cameras. It's large, it's intimidating, but there is a group of people in the world who really care about it, and we're really excited, and that's why we're here.
It's a blue Imperial probe droid.
It's
It
R2D2.
seems to be a design theme that follows a certain sci-fi genre of films. But
Yep.
I want to thank you guys for coming.
Thank
This
you.
was great. Nothing short of spectacular with the talent sitting to my left. So Casey, Lewis, Ben, you guys are going to go off. You're going to see what else is out there, and I suspect next NAB will have 16K, 24K, and full 60 OF, and everything will be great, right?
But we're still dealing with the same problems. If anybody's watching this and you know about LTO and you know a good deck here, you come to me because I need a new one.
Well, thank you guys for coming, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, everybody.
We do need to talk about LTO.